I want to bring back in Pete Williams and Chuck Todd so we can cover the legal and the political ramifications of this Michael Cohen plea. And let's start with the legal. You ended your piece there, Pete, on that tantalizing bit. 7 meetings that Michael Cohen has had with this special prosecutor. Do we have any sense of what he may be telling them and where this may all be leading?
No, but what we do get a good sense of is how much he's cooperating. You know, he pleaded guilty in August to unrelated charges, and he was not required to cooperate. He did not sign a plea agreement. So he's been willing to meet with Mueller's prosecutors. They sort of gave him the courtesy of bringing these charges in New York, even though you could argue the conduct happened down here before Congress. And he's going to be sentenced December 12th. So they're moving along smartly. Clearly, he's been very cooperative, but we just don't know what else they're pursuing based on what he's told Mueller.
It was interesting on this note, Chuck, to hear what President Trump said. He said, it's interesting to see, and I'm paraphrasing here, Michael Cohen is weak. He's talking to prosecutors. He said, unlike other people you see, which, of course, brought to mind Paul Manafort, who we've now learned did not cooperate with prosecutors, and prosecutors say Paul Manafort lied. So I mean, read the tea leaves there a little bit.
Well, look, I think it does show that Michael Cohen is a much more dangerous person to President Trump these days than anybody else involved in this investigation. That's number one. But look, I do think what this has done is this now calls into question anything that Congress has done. You realize Michael Cohen's version of events was used by the House Republicans in their report that essentially cleared the president. The president would use all the time as sort of propaganda on Twitter. The House Intelligence Report, they found no collusion. They found all of this. A lot of it was based on Michael Cohen's testimony. You now just sort of throw all that away. In some ways, Congress has to start from scratch, at least on the House side.
Right. Unless you, as the president says, Michael Cohen's lying now, not lying then.
Well, and that is the big danger here, right? At the end of the day, Mueller is relying on somebody who's now an admitted liar.
Yeah. A lot of people are wondering what is this all leading to, Pete? I mean, this business about whether Trump had business dealings in Russia is certainly related to the ultimate question. But the question he's investigating is whether or not Trump campaign officials were coordinating with Russia in its efforts to election meddle. And this doesn't tell us anything about that specifically.
Or even remotely. You know, it's important to remember, as you know, that there's nothing in the court documents that suggests that there was anything illegal about trying to do business with Russia. And that's not the basis of the charge. What Cohen is found guilty of and pleaded guilty to is lying to Congress. That's clearly a crime. Now, anybody else who lied to Congress is probably in trouble. But what it does say is that the Trump campaign clearly, the Trump organization had set up a conduit to deal with Russian government officials. So the question obviously is, having opened that circuit, was it used for anything else?
But Savannah, one thing we did learn about all of this now, we now have an explanation of why Donald Trump so curiously praised Vladimir Putin from essentially December of 2015 through the rest of the campaign. But why did it begin in December of 2015? Well, we now know. That was in the heart of that 60-day period of when they were truly pursuing Trump Tower Moscow. So that was on the front of Donald Trump's brain.
President Trump, or candidate Trump, was still a businessman, probably, perhaps thinking, let's keep this business opportunity alive.
Potential American foreign policy stances about Russia in the meantime.
Well,
that's what's
And by the way, we know from an insider who worked on this deal with Russia that they scuttled it. They called it off in June, the very day the Washington Post reported that the Russians were hacking emails. They decided it was too politically dynamite to keep going with it.
There are a lot of moving pieces, the special counsel looking into all of them. Pete and Chuck, nice to be in your home. Thank you for having us here in Washington.